But if we want to prepare the way for his second coming and reach and impact Jewish people, we got to put Yeshua back in his Jewish context and get our theology right. But Paul gives a third proof. I say then that they did not stumble as to fall, did they? Like a permanent stumbling, right? They didn't stumble as to fall permanently. May it never be. Again, the strongest statement Paul could make. May it never be. But by their false step, salvation has come to the Gentiles. Why has salvation come to the Gentiles? To provoke Israel to jealousy. Now, if their transgression leads to riches for the world and their losses, riches for the Gentile, meaning that Israel's rejectors of the Messiah and their loss has led to riches of the Gentiles, how much more their fullness? So Paul is saying, listen, if Israel's not accepting the Messiah as a whole led to blessing for the nations, what will their acceptance be but what? Life from the dead, right? Well, we'll see that in a minute. But I'm speaking to you who are Gentiles, in as far as I am an emissary to the Gentiles, I spotlight my ministry. If somehow I might provoke to jealousy my own flesh and blood and some of them. Paul says, listen, part of the responsibility of the church is to provoke Jewish people to jealousy. That's part of your role. Israel's role was to be a light to the nations. Paul says the church's role, one key aspect, is to provoke Jewish people to jealousy. But I got to tell you, the church has just provoked Jewish people, but not to jealousy. Because for the reality is that going back to the early church and culminating in Constantine, the emperor who called the Council of Nicaea, he was a pagan who I don't think really came to faith, though I think his mother was truly a believer. It was politically expedient for him. He maintained his connection to the worship of Ishtar and the sun and these pagan deities, okay? But he calls the Council of Nicaea. He excludes all the Jewish leaders from the land of Israel, bishops and leaders. He says, we want nothing to do with those despicable Jews who murdered our Lord. He separated Passover from the celebration of Yeshua's death and resurrection and created Easter, okay, completely disconnected from Passover, was the final stripping of the Western church from its Jewish roots, okay? And ever since that day, he created a Christianity that was unrecognizably Jewish and began the persecution of Jewish believers. And over time, the church persecuted Jewish people who came to faith and wanted to maintain their Jewish identity, and persecuted the Jewish people in general with all sorts of, we could list all sorts of crazy things. Why? It was the enemy at work. Because if the church's role is to provoke Jewish people to jealousy, because Jewish people's receiving of the Messiah is key to the second coming, the enemy wants to create division. He wants to create provocation to turn Jewish people off to the Messiah so he could delay the second coming. That's part of it. Okay? So I say all this to say, if the role of believers is to provoke the Jewish people to jealousy, we're not going to do it by presenting a completely foreign religion that's anti-Israel, anti-Jewish, okay? That's why I'm so excited that you're here. You are a fulfillment of prophecy. Believers returning to looking at the Gospels in the New Testament, in the Bible, in their original Hebraic context, from the perspective of Jewish roots, and being able to share that with other believers and with the Jewish people is key to provoking Jewish people to jealousy and fulfilling the mission that God created you for, right? It's so prophetic. It's so significant. It has to happen. Listen, it's like Joseph's brothers, when they went down to Egypt, they didn't recognize Joseph. Why? Because he walked like an Egyptian. He talked like an Egyptian. He was unrecognizably Jewish. It wasn't until he stripped off all of the Egyptian garb and spoke to them in Hebrew and said, "Ani Yosef, I am Joseph," that they understood. Listen, they didn't recognize him the first time, only the second. This is what's going to happen with the Jewish people. They didn't recognize him at the first coming, but at the second coming. But if we want to prepare the way for his second coming and reach and impact Jewish people, we got to put Yeshua back in his Jewish context and get our theology right. Because I believe part of provoking Jewish people to jealousy is that when God sees the power of the word and spirit in the life of a believer, right? And he sees, and when Jews see, and when Jewish people see their Christian friends getting more excited about the Jewish holidays and about the Hebrew scriptures and the Torah and all these things than they are, it provokes them to jealousy. I'll tell you, this is true, right? Jewish people were not into Kabbalah and Jewish mysticism. And then all of a sudden, Madonna got into it and celebrities in Hollywood got into it. And all of a sudden, Jewish people are running to do Kabbalah, right? Well, we don't want them to run after Kabbalah. We want them to run after Yeshua. Okay? I mean, Yeshua is a greater supernatural encounter than any other thing out there, right? I mean, that was my experience. I was looking for God and all these mystical places and looking, but I found it in Yeshua, in the new covenant. And so I believe that as you embrace your Jewish roots and your Jewish heritage, God is going to use you to provoke Jewish people to jealousy, to call other believers to it. And I believe that that is one of the keys to preparing the return of the Messiah. So you being here is prophetic. Be sure to share what you're learning, right?